and they are presenting on using small drones for urban mapping. So please welcome them. Thank you.
Thank you. Just by way of introduction, I haven't been around a long time. We hail from South Africa, or Southern Africa, a little country called Namibia, where I had run a land survey company doing mainly geodetic and cadastral surveys for many years. And emigrated to the United States about 12 years ago, married an American girl, that's why I'm here. Here legally and all, and have been doing quite a lot of international consulting to international development agencies like USAID and etc. And about 6-7 years ago, I was on a mission in Accra, in West Africa, capital of Ghana, trying to help some micro-lending bank on efficient ways to establish private property registers to use as collateral against which poor people can borrow. So the big drive is always bring the costs down. And so I was running around these so-called squatter towns with no overview whatsoever, walking in labyrinths, with no idea of where I am, and collecting data one diligent point at a time. And in that modus, I figured, man, if only I could get a bird's eye view of this. And when I got back, my wife happened to be looking at some BBC news thing on the web and on the internet, and she saw a picture of a British bobby with glasses on, flying a little drone like this. And then the penny dropped, and I figured that's exactly the tool. And I formed a little company, and I went to Germany, and I bought very expensive equipment, and you will see what the end of that move was about 6 years ago. I was joined by Oliver, my son. I was very privileged. He joined me about 3-4 years ago. He takes care of all of this, and I'm kind of more interested in the geomatic side, the geospatial side. Oliver, first slide, please. So I'm going to start with some background information and introduction on this project that we did, what preparations we went through, how we did the image acquisition, the processing workflow I'll go through a little bit, and then show you some of the geospatial products that can come out of an exercise like this. In 2013, April, we attended the annual World Bank conference on land and poverty, me and Grenville Barnes from the University of Florida, and we gave a paper on some of the work that I did in Africa before, motivating for using small drones of this kind to do boundary adjudications and cadastral mapping and so on. And as a result of that, an employee of the World Bank applied for an innovation grant, got some money, and off we went to Albania. Next slide, please, Oliver. To test UAV technology in a scenario where they are desperate for any good quality geospatial data. They came out of communism in the early 90s. Before that, they had suffered years and years of really abusive dictatorship. So the whole concept of property and ownership of property has always been, is still very new to them. And they were given, donors helped them to digitize whatever communist cadastre they had. They were organized in kolkhozes and so on. And these were supposed to be dissolved, and property was privatized, land was privatized. So they were given digital copies, but unfortunately, somebody made the mistake of giving them hard copies as well. So instead of being forced to do their stuff digitally, they did it on inadequate hard copy material. So this is what properties, sorry, the light is a bit bright here, but this is how property is registered in Albania today. And you will see the value of the buildings going up on the basis of these property rights is substantial. But I would like to see any American title insurance company get involved in Albania. Anyway, desperate for better spatial data quality. Next one. What's up?
The computer's slow.
So what they are doing, since 2007, they were given a countrywide coverage of orthophotos. In the urban areas at 8 centimeter resolution, which is rather high, and in the rural areas of, I think, 30 centimeter. And they are supposed to use that photography, that orthophoto, to perpetuate this property registration business. In 2013, it's just to show you why it's necessary that they get better data quality. They get their data not only improved in quality, but also updated. So on the left-hand side here, you see some peri-urban development, and on the right-hand side, 6-7 years later, that's what it looks like. But they have no record of it. So when property gets registered now and subdivided, somebody just estimates little squares on those ugly maps that I showed you. That's the background. Next one, Oliver.
It's coming.
What is going on here?
It's not a drone.
So we perceived very high risk. We were given this beautiful opportunity, loved it, but now, you know, when we had it, it was very intimidating. We were supposed to fly over populated areas. Big no-no here in the conventional first world. There are no regulations to hide in or feel comfortable inside of. No technical specs. We had to come up with, let's see what they need. In a foreign country, no local repair facilities or maintenance support, high establishment costs, intercontinental flight, very limited time. What if it rains all the time, for example? Okay, next slide, please. So, right from the get-go, we had to make some hardcore decisions as to how we would equip ourselves to do this job successfully. So, having been in this business rather early, there was not much of a choice in UAV platforms other than going to the Germans, basically. That's where the first multi-rotors came out. So we hung out with German proprietary manufacturers for quite a while and spent $50,000–$60,000 on single shell platforms, extremely expensive, very vulnerable, not repairable anywhere but in their own shops, subject to all sorts of import-export restrictions. So we knew we could not go there. Apart from that, we also had to go to a developing country, so affordability was a big deal. All right. So, and we had to, because the time is so limited and the establishment costs are so high, had to go low cost. We also wanted to make sure that we didn't get blocked by proprietary resistance of, we want a function like right now, and we don't want to have to put down money for it and wait another year until the function is released. Especially fail-safe measures are very important to an operator of UAVs. You know, an operator has to carry the risk after all, not the manufacturer. So it was important to us that we had access to the brains of it all to be able to adapt the platform for our particular purposes. Next one, please. You can guesstimate sort of 2 minutes before I say no. Right, so we ended up with this platform. Feel free to come around later on, lift it. It's robust, okay? It's very simple, weighs less than 2.5 kilograms. Is really, you know, we forfeited the gimbal. You know, everybody talks about, do you have a 2 or 3 axis stabilized gimbal or something? None of that kind. Just kept it as basic and as simple as possible for the very obvious reason, and that is you have to mitigate the risks. So you want to be as low in the sky, as light as possible, and as slow as possible. So that's how we came up with this platform, which is basically assembled from off-the-shelf components. Amazon.com gets you all of this stuff in front of your doorstep. The frame, for example, is made in South Africa, and not because I'm from there. We just happen to find them on the internet. The flight controller is made by 3DR in California, from Mexico. It's totally open source. What else can I tell you? Cameras from Korea, of course. It's $450, 20 megapixels. Very reliable piece of equipment. And what's more, no fancy housing or something like that. This is hot exchangeable. So if I don't like this camera, I can take another one. If a better model comes out tomorrow, I haven't got $2,100 sunk in this. I just change the sensor as and when. sensor technology develops. So here are the intrinsic mitigation factors of risk. You know, there is no regulation. There is nobody who's going to insure you, but the job has to be done. And so what do? Keep the weight very low, keep the price low as well. Low speeds, low altitude, keep line of sight so that you see what's going on. You can't salvage anything in any case. If anything goes wrong here, it just falls down. You want to know where it fell down. And then we have, of course, additional self-imposed precautions because there's no established set of rules. There's no handbook. And so we devised our own kind of measures that we stick to ourselves. Please follow up.
It's coming.
If you feel like interrupting me, please feel free to do so. So then we go into this image acquisition phase. This was now the preparation. We got all our stuff together, got it over there. Now we had to do some flight planning. Of course, we could do some of that at home already. We have a little table where we relate the camera geometry to the desired resolution of the product. And of course, we have some physical flight constrictions, like we can't fly for 20 minutes with this platform. We can fly for maybe 15 minutes, and if we fly at 5 meters per second, we can cover a distance of 2.5 kilometers. So it's a small footprint platform. Next slide, please. Of course, then we have a graphical user interface, open source platform, gets updated continuously, gets developed continuously, and has a huge user base with lots of volunteers and enthusiasts helping you to find your way around it, and people contributing to new ideas. So it's a very expansive innovation resource model that this software is based on. Once the flight plan has been designed, it gets uploaded to the platform, and then this is what happens in the field. There you can see the value of the real estate that we are talking about. Line of sight, eh?
Somewhere over there, really.
So you mess with good pair of binoculars, right?
Note also, it's cloud cover, eh? No conventional aerial photography would have been possible. And we prefer to take off from rooftops. This is part of the negotiation and translating and so on, access to rooftops. And it's important in the planning phase to always know the altitude relative to the terrain. See the weather there, for example. You are operating, it's a micro operation. So you can duck and dive. You are much more flexible in the deployment than you would be with a conventional plane. And then, you know, very small incremental steps, you can build up, you know, to cover a whole city, as long as you build it up incrementally and you do so safely. I mean, that's the most important part, to do it safely. So one flight at a time, change the batteries, a minute later you launch again. And so this is what you're seeing is about 200 hectares covered in a week. It's not much, but we're doing about 30 hectares in one day, and this kind of production modus is very much dictated by how many batteries do you have with you, how fast can you recharge them, how many chargers do you have with you, and all of that depends on, of course, on how did you travel to the country. I mean, how many resources do you have? Here in Florida, we could have like 40 batteries in the van if we needed to fly 40 flights a day. But
is each one of those is each flight line just one mission?
No, this is to give you scale. This is about 1.2 kilometers. So each flight covers 2 of these lines. So what you try to do with this, when you are this limited and constrained, you always have to have even number of flight lines in your flight plan. So that you don't fail. Okay, so that's stuff you learn very quickly. So you want to come back to where you start photographing. So, and each one of those had a unique launch pad. So that's important in this. This is very hilly, this terrain. So you have to design around what is your flying height going to be. So if you want to maintain a somewhat uniform GSD across the terrain, you have these high structures, and none of it is modeled properly, so you don't really know what you're doing. So we ran around with the GPS navigator, climbing up and down buildings to find the building elevations from which we were going to take off, because all of the flying heights are relative to takeoff position, or so you need to know what you're doing elevation-wise. And so we designed this whole lot to be more or less 50 meters above rooftops. And that would give us at rooftop a resolution of about 13 millimeters, and at the bottom of these buildings, anything up to 25 millimeters. All right, and also at the bottom of the valleys. So that's the field, the image acquisition side of things. Now for the big bottleneck in this whole, in projects of this kind, it's the processing. It's big data. We use structure from motion, and I think those of us who are from the geospatial background should emphasize that when we talk structure from motion, we are not talking classical photogrammetry. There's a lot of arguing going on and misunderstandings coming about because people don't separate these two kind of approaches clearly enough. I was very glad to see that the colleague from L.L.C did that. So we are not talking about classical photogrammetry here. We can afford to use cheap cameras. We don't rely on geometric stability of the platform itself. In fact, we invite some of the fantastic firmware geometry changing functionalities embedded in these, like autofocus, for example, because one of the byproducts of structure from motion algorithms is a calibration for each exposure of the camera. So, it doesn't matter if there's a varying camera geometry from one picture to the next. The next point is that you can actually mix cameras in one project. So you can use a GoPro for this and another camera for that. Put it all in one pot and it will adjust. For visualization, we're using a product called Terra Explorer Plus, and we are huge fans of Google Earth. Just love Google Earth because you can go anywhere in the world and you have a map. And we use it for planning, we use it for communication, even pre-mission communications. We say, where's the area that you want to have mapped? Oh, can I send you a JPEG? No, just send me a Latin along and I'll be okay. Or send me a little polygon in KML if you know how to do that. So Google Earth is a very important part of our operation. Just because we also feel like we should have a GIS package. We have Global Mapper, but we could also have used QGIS, open source, whatever. We are low-cost people. We try to bring the costs down because we are operating in this developing environment. And there's hardware. The hardware is expensive because of all of that processing that goes on. So this big brick, we carry laptops along because we have to virtually start processing on site. Next slide, please. Here's another way of demonstrating the workflow in a structure from motion approach. You put the images in. This is a bit blurred out. There's an approach where you can actually determine the camera coordinates very accurately in lieu of ground control that you could feed in there. Then you do what is known as a photo alignment. The result of that is a sparse point cloud. When you set your ground control points, you observe the image coordinates, in other words, and then optimize the sparse point cloud geometrically, and then only do you build a dense point cloud, which is the bulk of the effort in processing. And build geometry, build a tin, get the model out, and wrap the colors around it. And you end up with a texture atlas and a 3D model. So this is a typical screenshot of a big project, about 1,300 pictures in there. This is after ground control. You can see how this dapper little thing just went straight and took a shot every time it was supposed to take one. So very reliable. Lots of people will say, oh, can't be good, it's a hobby thing, it's only costs $2,500, $3,000, how can it be good? It depends on the man behind it, or the team behind it.
Thank you. Thank you. Take a look at the title slide later.
So here's some products. This is a point cloud. This is a high density point cloud. In this one particular model, Oliver, just zoom out a bit, please.
Sure.
I don't know. I mean, it's something like 3 digits of millions. So a little laptop can handle a lot of data as long as you're patient. It takes 80 hours to do 1,300 pictures. So next one, please, Oliver.
It's coming.
Sure, yeah, please, yeah, hammer, shoot.
When do you run it like at a high density or medium, or typically do you?
We always go for highest quality, finished. We don't even do the others, because the worst thing that can happen is if you find out, oh, it's disappointing, man, better do the high one. Then you start, after 40 hours, you add another 80 hours. So we go straight away. But I mean, there are horses for courses, and the product has to be fit for purpose. Generally, at this early stage in the game, we always produce optimum quality.
Were you processing on that laptop?
On that very laptop. In fact, what you see here, Oliver and myself, and this equipment here, and that little bit, that's a mapping company from A to Z. You've got to add a battery charger, a soldering iron, a bag of spares, and another laptop, and a lot of hard drives, external hard drives. And you've got a mapping company from A to Z. So this is the thing, it's going to disperse, I guess. Lots of little entrepreneurs like us are going to try and make it, and then I guess in the market it's going to consolidate and suck all those up again. I don't know how it's going to work out. Anyway, so for the engineers, this is a triangulated irregular network of building models. What you see here is just the blow up of this terrace here. It's I can't blow up the slide here enough to show you that there are actually little triangles here. There are way too many triangles. Many, many more than we actually want. These things are like real lead weights around our ankles. Next one, please. So having a dense point cloud, we can establish the geometry, and then wrap around the geometry, we can wrap color values. That looks a little nicer than the point cloud. Next one, please, Oliver.
Coming.
And then, of course, the product that they were all after was an orthophoto. So they weren't really after all of this byproduct stuff. But mapping these days is a product of modeling. It's just one specific side product of a 3D model, because you can't get to the map unless you do the 3D modeling. So here we have an orthophoto. The GSD is 2.5 centimeters, 1 inch, for those of you who are more comfortable with that. And this on the right-hand side is just a bit of a blow-up of the roof line of this building here. You'll notice that as opposed to classical photogrammetry products, you see a little bit of the side wall of a building, because you only have a very sparse distribution of perspective centers where the images get taken. So you can't always have a camera right on top of a building. So therefore, you will always see some fudge on the vertical surfaces on a conventional orthophoto taken from, say, 1,000 or 2,000 meters above the ground. Whereas here, there's virtually no sign of leaning buildings on the orthophoto. Next one, please, Oliver. If you organize your products in a raster format, in other words, you have a raster surface model and a raster image, you can look at it in 3D, and you'll notice that all of because it's actually not 3D, it's 2.5D, you'll see all of the texture on the vertical surfaces is lost, and you can't have overhangs. You can only have one elevation value per pixel. Okay, Oliver, how am I doing for time?
You're at 2:03 because we started out a little bit late.
So how much time do I have?
You have about, do you need 5 minutes for questions? Or
Yeah, no, I'm almost done. So
okay,
can I
so
finish?
If you need 10 minutes, you can take another
Oh,
10 minutes.
I don't need 10 minutes.
Okay, we'll be fine.
And I'm safe. Okay. I'm safe. So one of the biggest advantages of this idea that you are forced through modeling in 3D. So you have everything in 3D, so you can survey it. You don't have to send a guy out there with a stick. If the area is accessible, visually accessible, it can be surveyed virtually. And that is really a big, big game changer, especially in areas where you still have to do cadastral surveying, where people have to establish their boundaries and so on. It's much easier for everybody to participate intelligently in a planning exercise than it is on the ground and, oh, you see that tree over there and down there by the river, and you all walk there, and it takes so much longer. So this type of product enhances communication in planning environments, in planning scenarios tremendously, and it also engages citizens much more easily and across disciplines. So it's really a very, what shall I call it, a consensus-friendly tool. Next one, please, Oliver. Don't even know what it is. So this is using, here this point is not coming across very clearly here, but this is now a 3D model rendered in true 3D. So you can see roof overhangs here, just pan a little bit there. You can see that sort of thing now. But for that you need a rendering machine that's more than just that accepts more than just raster data. So you have multiple values, you can have multiple elevation values on a pixel. And it requires also that you micro-task the modeling of individual buildings. In other words, you can't just say, here are 1,000 photographs, make a model of the city for me. There's not enough memory in the world to do that efficiently. So what you normally do is you map a whole area, just make a normal 3D model of it, and you're not interested so much in the full 3D aspect of it. So you have a city model, and then you take each building individually, and you model that with much more computing resources per building than you would otherwise have. And then you get the kind of resolution that make the models, the individual models, really valuable. But of course it has to be fit for purpose, and it's only of interest if you are interested in individual buildings. So here we populated a Google Earth terrain with 3D models that were individually processed in PhotoScan from AD software. Next slide, please. And then, of course, if you really want to go overboard, you can add oblique photography to get ultra-rich, really realistic rendering of buildings. And I think with that, I'm going to say thank you for your attention. Thanks for having us. Any questions afterwards, please feel free to approach Oliver or me.
We have a couple of
So just, there's still something going on here.
Oh, sorry.
No,
So
it's
this
not
is dynamic rendering, sorry. Yeah, I just wanted to announce it's going to be over soon.
Sorry, I thought you were finishing up. I was like, oh, we have one question. My apologies.
So this kind of rendering also invites discussion. It's, you don't need to be an engineer to interpret these kind of drawings or plans or products. So you will notice that the quality of the buildings here on top of the ridge, the models there are much, much better than down the hill, because down the hill we didn't do oblique photography, we didn't add oblique photography. Okay, thank you very much. This is really the end.
Want to keep it brief? Go ahead.
One of the first questions I was going to ask is about oblique photography with that last shot, and you answered that. And then ground control, how much did you do?
So again, following this thing of fit for purpose, accuracy was not their primary concern, as you could see from those drawings. Accuracy, whether it was half a meter or to half a meter, was definitely better than what they had. So we didn't have to compete on the precision level. But being a land surveyor, I'm phobic about accuracy all the time. So, you know, we had about six to 7 points over 30 hectares. And we actually organized the job in such a way that we have 7 blocks, and we performed a separate adjustment for each block. And where the 2 blocks meet, we could then compare how good our mapping was. And that was very enlightening to us. So I'm quite confident, since one expects the biggest errors to be on the seam of it, where there's the least amount of overlap, that, you know, we did get about 10 centimeter accuracy generally on these models. And that's with minimal control. Only 6 points per 30 hectares is really sparse. What we did at the same time is, but that wasn't part of the mission of our client, is we flew this with a dual frequency GPS receiver attached to the drone all the time. And it's linked to the drone, up to the camera. And so we recorded the event of each exposure, and we have this data now, and we're going to process it, and we're going to make some kind of an analysis on whether we couldn't perhaps get away completely without any ground control, just using airborne control.
What do you think the accuracy of the GPS is?
This GPS receiver, you know, it's
what was it quoted anyway? I mean,
sure, no. I mean, technically, it's a GPS, dual frequency GPS. Gives you generally, if your ambiguity is resolved, that means if you have resolved the integer number of waves between your antenna and the satellite, technically it's 5 millimeters absolutely plus 1 part per million of the range between your base and your rover. That's technically how GPS accuracy is defined in the geodetic sense.
How expensive is that GPS receiver?
You and I can talk about it. It is, let me put it to you this way. What you see here is less than 2/3, less than 2/3 of a GNSS rover. So this is actually supposed to be in the toolbox of surveyors, not of photogrammetrists, per se. Not so much.
That's pretty small. It's a pretty small GPS.
But you know, I mean, of course, you have to have some budget for error propagation here. You have the antenna phase center, and then you have the optical center of the camera. That's actually the coordinate, the position that you need to determine.
You want to have one quick question?
Can I ask it?
Of
It
course,
may not be a quick question. I mean, it's a very non-technical question.
Sure.
You know, here in the U.S., one of the biggest fears about using UAVs from our Federal Aviation Authority is potential lack of privacy. The
Yes.
privacy issue that's raised. What was the sentiment in Albania?
Absolutely no problem. Detection device. So no. I think the biggest fear in the US is safety. Okay, because the whole issue with the FAA, as we perceive it, as operators who are seriously being hindered in getting going with this, is the dramatization of what can go wrong. And so this thing will always fall into a pram with a little baby in it, or on an old lady, or something like that. But if you look through these urban maps, for example, don't fly over populated areas. I have a hunch that is most probably the safest area to fly over, because you have so many emergency landing spots on roofs that you can see, that you could possibly consciously crash your drone into. When you look at the imagery, I've done an exercise like that over an area of 25 hectares. I could see 11 people. I could identify 11 people. And I did not go to the trouble of finding out whether the drone actually was ever, during that flight, over an individual. So it's fear that, it's fear. It's not rational thinking. It's not statistics. This platform here has got a square meter of impact area. It's much more frangible than a fully controlled, piloted helicopter, totally, complying with FAA rules. So this is the safest way to make maps like I've shown you now, in my mind. I'm 100% convinced of it.
The Street View, Google cars are more of a privacy concern than anything, because you can actually see the people's faces, whereas here the perspective is on top of somebody's head. So you're not even able to see their face. So, so they separated the privacy issue from FAA, and it's now underneath the Department of Commerce, I believe. Because FAA said, we don't want to deal with this.
It's not a government.
Yeah, that's not.
It's dealt for in any case in the existing legislation. There's no need to. I mean, you know, I can take a broomstick and spy on my wife's, my husband's, my neighbor's wife. I can take a broomstick to spy. You know, I mean, what should be banned, if anything needs to be banned, is cameras. You know. Right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.